Since 2003, this is the Sports Source, East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Presented by Pipe Wrench, and by Junk Be Gone, and by the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome into the Sports Source here in our Junk Be Gone studios. We appreciate you being with us on another summer Sunday as we try and beat the heat here in East Tennessee. We're going to be talking about SEC Media Days. Well, actually, SEC Media Days is this week in Dallas with 16 teams. We're going to be talking about how things have changed. We did a little of this last week. We're going to kind of carry it over this week, talk about scheduling, talk about who's going to be hurt by this. You're adding teams. Who does that hurt? How does it impact Tennessee? Everybody keeps saying, well, eventually it's going to go to a Super League. What the heck would a Super League look like, and is it possible to even get to a Super League? That's the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about today. Let's get right into it. Our first segment is brought to you by our friends at the Garza Law Firm. All the uncertainty surrounding the SEC right now and Tennessee's place in it could leave you feeling nervous, and that's the same feeling you'll probably experience if you ever find yourself in need of a quality attorney. And while the Garza Law Firm can't really help with football tension, Marcos and his team can help you when it comes to putting your mind at ease when you have legal issues you're having to tackle. They are the best in town. They've been the best in town for a long time. Check out garzalaw.com or just ask around. You'll hear good things. Garza Law, the Garza Law Firm. Turn to them when you have a legal need. All right. I want to welcome in the first three members of our panel today. We're going to be rotating early on, but they're actually four analysts and myself here, so there's five of us today. Want to welcome in Jimmy Hines right there, Ryan Callahan right here, Josh Ward. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's appreciated. As I said, Media Days event being moved to the Lone Star State for the first time ever. You've got 16 schools who are going to be at this thing, so that means more boring talk. But it also shows this is not your daddy's SEC in terms of where they're doing this and how many schools are involved, et cetera. Last week we talked about whether or not this expansion is good for fans in any way. I want to ask today, is it good for schools? Which schools? I'm not talking money here. Let's keep it strictly to football. And I want to know which schools in the SEC, and there are going to be some obvious ones, I expect us just to throw those out quickly, which schools are hurt by Oklahoma and Texas coming into this league by the end of division play, by all the other permutations that spin out of a bigger league? Which schools are hurt the most?
I'll start with the old SEC East. I'll go Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Missouri, I guess I would throw in there for most years, even though they're pretty good right now. I don't know that they'll be able to sustain this. So to me, those four programs, you're going to have a harder time sustaining anything resembling long-term success because you just knocked down the pecking order that much farther. So I think the SEC East protected those programs in some years, allowed Kentucky to be a 7-8 win team. Now that's going to be even harder without division play. So I think all that works against those old SEC East teams.
Yeah, Kentucky got the 10 wins twice in 4 years.
Yep.
I don't see that happening again. And I think it's going to hurt Missouri because I think that Texas and Oklahoma will handle them. And that, to me, that's one of the teams you think, well, okay, so they're getting a couple of rivalry teams.
Yeah.
Well, would those teams beat them? What does that do you? And I feel the same about Arkansas in that. Yeah. I think it hurts Arkansas. They're struggling right now anyway. Mm-hmm. And now when you put Texas and Oklahoma rivals and those rivals beat you, I think that hurts. I think almost half the league is hurt by Texas and Oklahoma coming in.
You could make a case that everyone but the absolute blue bloods who are on top right now are hurt to some extent because the path to Atlanta just got unbelievably more difficult. I mean, the idea, it's still two teams out of a big league. Yes, but it's no longer just being the best out of what might be a bad 7-team division. You got to be the second best team out of 16, not the best out of this 7. That is a massive, massive change, I think. So you could make a case that a lot of teams are going to be hurt by this. Who's hurt?
Yeah, if you're talking about Atlanta, everybody is negatively affected in some way just because there are two more teams that will have a shot at Atlanta, and they're two quality programs. When you talk about Oklahoma and Texas, they're going to come in thinking, well, let's get to Atlanta. Let's go play for an
Texas,
SEC title.
certainly. They're telling people already.
Immediately.
Yeah.
But If you kind of zoom out big picture, Missouri and then Arkansas, I would go both from a competitive standpoint, but also recruiting. They can't go to Texas and say, hey, come play for us to be in the SEC. They can maybe to lower level prospects, but Texas and Texas A&M are saying the same thing. Oklahoma is saying the same thing. There used to be an SEC versus the Big 12 recruiting battle. Now you can't say, come play in the SEC any more than the newcomers can.
I was looking at it and I was trying to think, all right, Kentucky, and you mentioned most of these, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M have never made it to Atlanta. Now, A&M has had some good teams, and they've only been in the league for 12 years, but still put them in there. So if you've never made it to Atlanta, it gets harder. Teams that have never won once they've made Atlanta, Carolina, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi State. All right, that's a huge chunk. A&M also hurt by what you're talking about, Texas coming in.
Yeah.
They've already, you had Texas come in and swipe their baseball coach. We're talking football, but Texas is going to rub their nose in the fact that their little brother, they are already. So I think it's a terrible deal for Texas, for A&M. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, there's a reason they were so upset day number one at SEC Media Days when news leaked out.
And I can't blame them, which we'll get into. But so you got Kentucky, Vandy, Ole Miss, A&M, Carolina, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi State. Those teams have never won in Atlanta. Some of them have never reached Atlanta. So what about, does this hurt LSU, Florida, Tennessee, Auburn? I'm taking Alabama, Georgia, and Texas out. Now, we don't know about Texas. We don't know about Oklahoma. I don't think it's going to be good for them. But let's talk about the traditional SEC, kind of that middle grade. Those teams that can make a run, bounce up, win a national championship, but then they kind of fall back behind the Bamas and Georgias right now. Florida, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn. Who's hurt by this out of those four? Is one of them hurt more than the others?
I think all of them are hurt just about equally. I think Tennessee, I would lean toward the SEC East teams being hurt more because Tennessee, Florida had a more manageable path. If they caught Georgia in the right year, they play Alabama and LSU, maybe you get lucky and that's a year you get some help from Georgia and you make the SEC title game. Now that's not going to be possible. You're going to have to go in looking at it like one SEC loss is all you can afford to have any shot at Atlanta because in the 16-team league, somebody's going to make it there with one loss. So I think it's those SEC teams first, but even LSU and teams like that, it's going to be harder. It's just everybody's knocked down a peg, to your point. It's everybody but the teams at the very, very top are going to be affected.
Right.
It's going to be harder. I think immediately it's going to be Florida because they're going to fire their coach after this year.
Right, they're down at the
Probably,
moment. Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it hurts Tennessee. And while I like what Josh Heupel's done and he's brought this program back to relevancy, I think it's going to be difficult with Texas and Oklahoma in here. And if you take out the 90s and you go back to like 1960 going forward, Tennessee is pretty much in the middle of the pack of the SEC as far as their SEC record. So I think it's going to hurt Tennessee. How significantly, I'm not sure, but I do think it hurts. It just moves them, in my opinion, down the pecking order a little bit.
I'll give you another way of looking at it, and it could be wrong, but it's another way of looking at it. You could make the case that Auburn and Tennessee would be hurt less than Florida LSU simply because, again, this may be nonsense, but Auburn and Tennessee both played Alabama and Georgia every year anyway. All right. So, and Auburn had Alabama, Georgia, LSU. Tennessee had Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Okay. How much tougher can the schedule be than what you've already been through? Whereas some of these other teams, I don't know that they were playing three teams that had won, Florida had 2, Georgia's got 2, Alabama had 6. That's a lot of national championships over the last 20 years, and you were playing those teams every year. So I just wonder if LSU and Florida will have to step up a little more in terms of their schedule than Tennessee and Auburn will.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but to me it does depend on the scheduling format for the future because to your point, there are some ways where this might come out better for Tennessee and Auburn, teams like that. So I'm not saying it's going to help them, but it might be about a wash. You take off Alabama every year or Georgia every year, you add Texas or Oklahoma, it might be about the same.
Now, where it may help Florida and LSU is their recruiting in their state is so good. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's not as good in Tennessee's better now.
That's a good point.
It's a lot better, but it's not as good as Texas or Florida.
Which has been something that has, Arkansas traditionally tried to get into Texas, but their recruiting hasn't been great. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Oklahoma. Yeah. Now, at least Texas is coming with them and Texas A&M, but that we talked about it last week. I think I have more questions about Oklahoma than I do Texas. I'll let you finish this up.
Yeah, to Jimmy's point on Florida, I do think the timing is terrible. They're trying to get back to being at a high level. They have a brutal schedule. Part of that is their own fault because they scheduled so hard out of conference, but time continues to get away from the last time they were at an elite level. This show has covered how many coaches they've gone through.
They've turned into Tennessee.
Yeah, so they inherit such a difficult schedule right away. That's only going to make it tougher. Tennessee is in a pretty good position. If this were 3 years ago, it would feel like terrible timing for Tennessee.
Yeah.
One thing that I do think balances things out for these programs, maybe getting to Atlanta's tougher, they do at least get a 12-team playoff to where fans can say, well, if we're not the top 2, if we can be top 4, maybe 5 and get in to the playoff, you can still have a happy fan base even if you're falling short of Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think you can make the pretty good case that long term, the 4 playoff slots are going to mean more than the SEC championship. Okay. When we come back, is the SEC wise to delay a move to a 9-game conference schedule? Look, we've talked the last couple of years that they should go to 9. I still think they're kind of cowardly to not do it. But are they wise to be cowards? Are they smart chickens? That's the thing. We'll discuss that next. Coming back. Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by A.G. Hines Company. Week in and week out, no one is a bigger supporter of this show, even when we're doing a Sports Source segment on the radio with Tyler and Will. A.G. Hines Company is there bringing it to you. If you have a home improvement project on the docket, start it with a trip to A.G. Hines Company. Gordon Hines and his family do a tremendous job, just as that family has done a tremendous job for more than 100 years. aghines.com to learn more. And hey, I just mentioned him. Welcome in to Tyler Ivins. Tyler, thanks for being here.
John, appreciate it.
All right, man. I am in favor of the SEC going to a 9-game conference schedule. I've made that clear over the years. Jimmy, I think you're in favor of 9.
I am.
Ryan, in favor of 9. Tyler, you haven't been here, but in favor of 9. Okay. Everyone here is in favor of 9. Me, I don't want to see. I could give a hoot about games against. I don't want to see anybody playing Kent State or Chattanooga or Austin Peay or Tennessee's Texas San Antonio. Don't care. Don't want to see Alabama play them. Don't want to see Tennessee play them. So I think it's chicken for them not to go to 9 games. But are they smart chickens? And here's why. The people who would say they're smart to stay at 8 say so because, well, you want to get paid for that 9th game. You want to get paid. That's 8 more games you could sell. And if ESPN's not going to pay you, don't do it. And there's another group that are like, well, we don't know how the playoffs are going to be decided yet. The Big Ten, they rushed in. Maybe they're foolish to have rushed into a 9-game schedule. Tyler, I'll start with you. I don't like it. You want a 9-game schedule.
Yeah.
But is the SEC smart to be chicken on this one?
100%. And it was the second point you brought up. Until the College Football Playoff Committee gives you some type of parameters on what they're going to be grading on or what exactly it is that's going to build a resume that gets you into the playoff, do what Notre Dame did. Play nobody. Play directional dog meats, sprinkle in a couple of mid-tier Power 4 conference teams. If I'm Tennessee, everybody wants you to stop playing Syracuse's of the world. Nope. I'd find somebody who's in a group Power 4 team and find the low of the lows. Go out there and try to find out what exactly it is. You already brought up Josh did Florida the last segment. They're nuts for what they've done. If I'm where you stay 8, I get about the money aspect, but I'm trying to get one of those dance cards for the 12-team table at the end of the season.
We need like barf bags, like on an airline.
Yeah.
You may be right and they may be smart, but that whole answer it's the opposite of everything I believe. It's sickening.
I'm here. I'm just trying to think because at the end of the year, people want to make sure you're playing for a national championship. Well, you can have a great season, but if you're not one of the 12,
well, we
who
need
cares?
a playoff committee that's going to start rewarding people for playing good games.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Are they smart to do it?
Yeah, 100%. Not much the SEC and all these conferences
I never
do.
should have asked this.
Not much that they do doesn't make business sense. It's whether it's good for the fans. And, of course, it's not best for the fans, but from a money perspective, the biggest thing always is money. So this is about getting ESPN back to the table with more money. The playoff stuff, that's a nice secondary perk as well. They would like to get more playoff teams in there, up their leverage for the next negotiation, how many automatic bids they can get. But this is smart from the SEC's perspective. And to Tyler's point, it's not just about getting teams in the playoff and all that and making this. The whole industry is set up around ADs and coaches getting as many wins as possible, getting to 6 wins if you're in Florida's situation.
Danny White gets a bonus every time somebody wins a title or wins X games or whatever. Yep. Yeah. Jimmy.
It's a maybe. It's not 100%. It's maybe. So let's say after 2 years, you don't get more money from ESPN. You don't increase your package by going to 9 games. Then what good was it?
Yeah.
Right? So, and the first 2 years what if you, by playing a weaker schedule, you don't get a couple of teams in the college football playoff?
Yeah.
So right now, it's not 100%, it's a maybe. You have to see what happens. If they get penalized by the college football playoff,
Yeah.
and if they don't get more money 2 years down the road from the TV package, what good was it?
If I'm on that committee and I'm looking at if it comes down to Michigan versus Georgia getting in, and Michigan's game in Week 11 was Indiana. Okay, no great shakes there, but Indiana. Georgia's game in Week 11 was Charleston Southern. Michigan's in. Michigan's in with me. I don't care about the rest of it. It's like, no.
Well, I do care about the rest of it.
Indiana versus Charleston Southern is a win for Michigan.
You can't look at 1 week.
Yeah.
You got to look at 12 games.
Well, yeah, of course, but I'm saying if that's the difference.
Thank you.
That's a big one for me.
That's why
I'm weighing that one pretty
Small
heavy.
step.
But look, I would take Florida's schedule against an 8-game conference schedule against the country this year.
Oh,
this
I'm
year.
agreeing with you.
So it depends on what your non-conference
That's rare,
schedule
though.
is. Yeah,
That's-
but it depends on what it is. You have to look at the entire strength of schedule.
Baby steps. If I'm SEC, can we at least get rid of the FCS foes? I mean, look, and look, I'm going to stay on task here a little bit, but the two things I'll give the Big Ten credit for, and I won't give them a lot of credit, they came out many years ago and said, you're not scheduling FCS opponents if you don't already have them under contract. And number two, I like how they got a little creative about starting their season in conference. May not be a big game, but you get it. But you're right, barf bag, you better show that you at least got something on the table to play for a title.
If I'm the Big Ten commissioner, then I am getting with my network partners, CBS, NBC, and Fox, who don't cover the SEC. And I'm going to tell them that week when the SEC plays all these laughers at the end of the year, we are hitting that, and we are hitting it in every broadcast. We're hitting it 10 times in every broadcast. We're going to make sure that the voters know who the clowns are and who's playing big boy games. And if you're not ready to put on your big boy pants, then enjoy Charleston Southern. We're going to make sure everybody knows you shouldn't be in the playoff. That's the way I would do it.
the reason the
But
SEC
I'm a mean guy.
Well, the reason the SEC is willing to take that chance, though, they know their 8-game schedule, Tennessee's schedule this year, for instance, is just as strong as a 9-team Big Ten schedule because the Big Ten, as we talked about last week, is not as deep as the SEC. It just now got to the point where it's even
But
But
close.
the
here's
SEC's
the
going to say,
problem.
look at game 12.
But here's the problem. We all sit around here and say, oh, yeah, but the SEC, it's tough because you're playing so many straight games. Well, that's true in the Big Ten, too. Those are rivals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could say that the SEC is strong in the Big Ten, but the idea that Northwestern's a joke. Well, if you play Northwestern every year, that's a rival. It'd be the same as playing Mississippi State every year, and we see Mississippi State pull upsets down here. That kind of stuff can happen. But anyway, all right, we move forward. We say two people say they're wise. Jimmy says maybe, and I just throw up on them. When we come back, there are complaints from schools about who their 3 permanent foes would be in a 9-game schedule world. It's not fair. I've come up with a fair way to do it. We'll show you that next. Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Elkmont Station. Whether it's a family get-together, a business meeting, a romantic dinner, or just a quick meal on your way to or from a game, Elkmont Station offers a unique farm-fresh menu, craft cocktails that are out of this world. Right off Campbell Station Road, elkmontstationknox.com. Check it out. You will be very happy that you did. They got a great menu, very unique place. Check it out, Elkmont Station. All right. When talk of a 9-game schedule started, some schools whined about the 3 permanent rivals they would get. For example, Nick Saban and Alabama suddenly went from we want a 9-game schedule to, well, we're good with 8 because they were shown that they would have Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee as their permanent rivals. The irony there is they're already playing Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee every year, so it's kind of stupid. But that's what schools do. They cry. So that said, I wanted to see if you could come up with a fair schedule system. I think you can, and let me explain how I did it, and then we'll let you guys poke holes in it. First of all, use the all-time wins. Supposedly the SEC is going to look at the last 10 years when they're breaking out their schedule format. It's more accurate to go back through history. I know teams are hot right now, but over the long haul, the teams at the top are the teams at the top. So what you got there is all the teams in the SEC listed 1 to 16 with their winning percentage, all right? The top 8 teams in my system, that'd be Alabama down through Auburn. They would play the top 10 twice. So that'd be down through Arkansas twice, and they'd play 1 against the bottom 6. The bottom 6 teams, they play 2 against each other. So the good teams play the good teams, the bad teams play more of the bad teams. And in the middle there, you got Arkansas and Texas A&M. They play each other. That's their crossover game. Arkansas and Texas A&M, because they play each other already. They've been playing each other in Jerry World. That's about to come to an end. But it makes sense. And then every 8 years, a couple of rotations of this thing, you check your winning percentage and you move up or down accordingly. And it just kind of slots in there. What this does is it keeps a lot of traditional rivals alive. Not all of them, but it makes good TV matchups. Let's take a look at the next graphic here. And this is how it worked out. All right. So you got to keep the big games together first. All right. So when you're talking about the same group, Alabama and Auburn, obviously. Oklahoma and Texas, yes. Florida and Georgia. Well, that leaves Tennessee and LSU. Okay, now that's not a permanent rival now. It'd be a good TV rival. And also, I wanted to show, no matter what you do, somebody's going to get screwed, so I screwed Tennessee. Tennessee fans need to realize that it could be them. So often, Tennessee people do this and Georgia people do it, and they take care of their own school. We need to remember, hey, the roulette wheel could spin the wrong way. So you could get LSU as your permanent rival. Then you look there, Texas A&M and Arkansas. You go on down, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. It keeps all the traditional rivals intact. Then you do the second game. All right, there's your Tennessee, Alabama. Arkansas, Oklahoma, they're probably going to get paired together because they're next to each other. Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Auburn. So it makes sense down there. Ole Miss and Missouri, because they're very close together. That's the closest you can get for Missouri, except for Arkansas, Kentucky, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Vandy. Then your crossovers are traditional as well. Alabama, Mississippi State. All right, Missouri, Oklahoma, et cetera. I'm not going to run through all these. But the gist is, if you look across there, Tennessee would have LSU, Alabama, and Vanderbilt. Okay. Now, granted, most Tennessee fans would prefer Kentucky, Alabama, and Vanderbilt, or if you had a good team, Florida. But again, you could get hosed there. LSU, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. You look at all these, like Alabama's would be Auburn, Tennessee, Mississippi State. That's traditional. They're closer to Mississippi State than anywhere else. Everyone gets two good ones. Everybody gets one bad one. If you're at the bottom of the league, it's vice versa, which is kind of the way they do the schedule now anyway. And then in the middle, it's A&M and Arkansas. Now, I think that's pretty fair. I think you could do it with that system, and there's not a lot of headaches. I turn it over to you guys to point out all the headaches. And tell me why I'm wrong and why you dislike it.
It's a pretty fair system. I've said from the start, it comes down to whether you want fairness or rivalries. You can't have both. And
I'm sure you can.
And well, it's the best you can do blending both approaches.
Yes.
Because there you lose Alabama, LSU.
Yeah.
Tennessee
As a
obviously
permanent
loses.
rival, yeah.
Tennessee loses Kentucky and some other permanent rivals. So,
But if you only got three teams, three permanent rivals,
something's got to go. So yeah, that's about the best you could do. I think it's a fair system, but that's what people have to weigh. Are you going to keep that, or go with something like that where it keeps as many of your rivalries as possible while also making it somewhat fair, or are you more interested in preserving the history and fairness goes out the window, basically?
I like the idea of it's good teams play each other twice,
Absolutely.
bad teams play each other twice. I think that one makes sense to me. But thoughts, Josh? You're a hatchet man with most of my plans. Do your thing.
Yeah, I don't even know why it's worth considering.
There you go.
We've got to get more randomness to it. I think with 16 teams, and I'm a 9-game fan. I want 9 games within the conference. I think 8 games with 16 teams is just silly at this point. Have the league members play each other. So holding on to some of the rivalries, you can't hold on to all of them, and you're maybe going to build some new rivalries, or at least familiarity, where you look forward to the next time you see this school, as opposed to saying, well, we'll see them in 8 years. So that plan is, I think, a really good starting point. I'm sure we could find some tweaks, but I think that's a really good starting point.
Tyler.
Tradition, in my opinion, went out the window whenever you started collecting money in expansion.
Yep.
So when it comes to but you're losing the classic rivalries, doesn't matter. Now, also to the point, this isn't just me homering it up here. I love the Matrix. I wish you would schedule our fantasy football schedule. That's even. But what I will say is this. If we ever get an answer to what the previous segment was, what's the criteria to get into the college football playoff? Tennessee fans shouldn't hate that at all. You keep Vanderbilt, you get Alabama, and you get yourself the juice game with LSU.
Which I think, that's a random deal. But
I hear you. But it's an opponent that will make you look good on the resume.
Yeah, and I also think that's one that could become a rival. I mean, if you remember, was it 2005 when they broke the team's bus windows, throwing liquor bottles at it, and shook the bus? I think anybody could get in a rivalry with LSU. So I think that would be a good
Tennessee
one.
and LSU fans, again, just as that's the way it generated, they've got some fun craziness that would go back and forth. So that would be an example of new rivalries could be born.
The other thing that's kind of overblown about this, and this is one thing that Greg Sankey talked about a couple of years ago or I guess last year when they ignored him and stayed at 8, he made the point at the beginning of Media Days that it's just, we're talking about, it would be 3 games. So you'd have 6 other games that rotate. So the idea that, oh no, our schedule is tied up to these 3 games, there are 6 more teams that are going to rotate on and off.
Right.
This is kind of small. It's 1/3 of your league schedule. So it's really nothing to cry about. But it's the SEC. It's college football. That's what fans do. They cry. And coaches. Fans and coaches cry. All right. When we come back, speaking of crying, there are rumors that Texas A&M isn't happy with the SEC for allowing Texas in, and they're already sneakily talking to the Big Ten. Let's talk about that next. Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Southeast Termite and Pest Control. We still have more than half our summer to go here in East Tennessee, so if you're frustrated that mosquitoes are ruining your outdoor fun and carrying off your children, call Southeast Termite and Pest Control. They have a treatment that will clear out the skeeters and leave the good insects undisturbed. Southeast Termite and Pest Control, they do a great job. They've been my pest control company for many a year now. SoutheastTermite.com. All right, been a lot of chatter online, and this is how the business works now with YouTube and podcasts. It used to be you had unscrupulous journalists out there. There were some. Now it's just people looking for clicks. And once somebody puts a click out there, everybody else jumps on it because they want the click. It's like, ooh, look, he's getting clicks. Then we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then it gets so big that we in the actual media have to talk about it. So for all I know, this is total nonsense. Somebody just threw it out and it's taken off. But there is talk that Texas A&M may be headed to the Big Ten. They are so mad that the SEC supposedly, and Feinbaum talked about this recently, the SEC had told them, okay, Texas never gets in. You're the Texas school. And then Mike Slive stepped aside, Greg Sankey stepped in and said, we're bringing in Texas when they asked. And everybody in the league said, yeah, sorry, A&M, kiss it, we're bringing them in. And they're mad about that, which I would be too. The question is, do you think A&M would be mad enough to leave? And one last thing, for years the SEC used to brag about the fact that, well, we don't have an exit fee in our league. 3 years ago, they put an exit fee in. If you give them notice, 2 years notice, it's $30 million. If you don't give notice, it's $45 million. So the SEC now thinks somebody could leave or you don't do that. Anybody here think A&M would actually flee Texas again and go to the Big Ten?
I don't, but I also didn't think Texas and Oklahoma would be part of the SEC. So I can't discount it, but I'd be very surprised.
I don't know that we can discount anything anymore, can we?
No.
I would be surprised.
I call Texas A&M's bluff. Now, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, the reason why Texas A&M wanted to get away from Texas in the first place, besides just the pesky, annoying, and the recruiting that goes back and forth, I thought it was a whole lot of the whole because the Big 12 was bowing down to Texas, the Longhorn Network, and it went. Well, now they're in the SEC, and Greg Sankey has slammed the scepter down and said, no, they're all equals. We're 16 equals. That's the way the conference is. What's the problem now, Texas A&M? The way I look at it is love it or leave it. Get out if you don't like it, A&M.
Josh?
Never say never in a lot of things, and that's absolutely the case in college athletics now. We're in a world where Cal and Stanford play in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and Oregon and Washington are making their move to the Big Ten. So could one school jump from here to there? Colorado went back to the Big 12. I know it's not the size of Texas A&M. I would still be really surprised. I'm sure that they're going to hate Texas being in the SEC. I'm sure behind closed doors and sometimes publicly they're going to complain about Texas being in the SEC. But I think the Aggies will remain in the SEC while doing that complaining.
Yeah, they already hate them for stealing their baseball coach.
I am an honorary Aggie. I'm already out. I thought Texas was a dumb move. I don't think Mike Slive makes that move. I don't think Mike Slive, based on what he did, he used to get everybody, all his ducks in a row, then he would make an announcement. Sankey seems to be going the other way. The train leads him sometimes. He also says I and me a whole lot more than Mike Slive ever did. So when I look at this Texas thing and bringing in them, double crossing, I think Slive, he constantly talked about, what was the line? We'll have vigorous discussion or something. He would admit the fact that people would argue, but we all got on the same page.
The First Amendment is alive and well.
I think he would have looked at this and said, wait a second. We are bringing disharmony into this league to screw over one of our own, someone that I brought in and I made a promise to. I don't think they do this if Sankey were, or if Slive were still the commissioner. So I think it's going to be the mark of Cain, the original sin. I think however long the SEC lasts, at some point we're going to look back and say, it was screwing over A&M and bringing Texas in that bit them in the butt.
Maybe I'm on an island on this, but wouldn't be the best way of trying to combat everything Texas is doing is just beat them in sports? Mm-hmm. And then there's also this whole, and maybe this is a little juvenile or high school of me, what's that reputation of Texas A&M going to be if they actually leave the SEC? What keeps them from wherever their new conference is? What keeps them in 6 or 7 years going, I don't like the color of the wall paint. I want out of this conference too, over and over. And I understand
Texas is doing that.
Right, exit fees, but at the same time, at one point, if I'm Texas A&M, I got to turn to the boogeyman and go, this ends now. So how are we going to figure it? I'm not, not loser leaves town type pro wrestling, but you got to figure out something where you can just go, all right, we can't get rid of you, so how do we exterminate you for good?
I think your idea, look, Sankey has tried to make it clear that they are one of 16, and they've turned their Longhorn network into an online network now. Mm-hmm. It's an archive of all their stuff online. But I'm not so sure they're not going to come in and try and run this league. We may be hearing, oh no, they're going to be just like everybody else. You tell that to Texas. I'm not sure. We'll see how that works. That's like Notre Dame. Everybody wants them in their conference. I don't know how good of a conference mate they would be if they were a full-fledged member of a conference. I don't know.
Yes or no, did Alabama kind of get their way shoving things around in the SEC? You debate that. Being in the backyard, maybe some people would say that Saban in Alabama, things kind of got run through with Alabama, but I don't think Texas is going to come in, whether you believe it or not, and get the same beneficial treatment, if you will.
I don't know what was the beneficial treatment they got.
I'm talking about to an extent of just like, hey, we're going to play in the backyard of Alabama. There's some of those other quiet whispers. Again, it could also be
perception.
Yes, please, perception.
Think about this too. Harvey Schiller, back in about 1989, wanted Texas A&M, and he wanted Florida State and Miami. Okay. I wonder if there was an objection from one of the Texas schools at that time as to why that never unfolded.
I don't know. I found a story when we were doing the Mr. SEC thing years ago. I found a story from the time where Schiller was actually discussing with someone. It had been like 10 years after the fact, so it was mid-'90s. And he talked about the fact that Texas felt the SEC wasn't up to academic standards. So they didn't come, and that's when Joe Dean really wanted A&M in. LSU was the number one in terms of getting A&M in. They wanted them, and Joe Dean was behind it. So Joe Dean went to Houston, who at that time was killing it in basketball and football, and tried to pair Texas A&M with Houston. And the league just said, they don't fit. That's not like any of our other schools. Now, that was an article written with Schiller giving some quotes. Who knows? I would assume back then in that day it wasn't just a podcast, so I'm going to give it a little accuracy. I'll believe it. Yeah. But it is interesting, the Texas thing and their attitude. We'll see. I just don't see it being a fit, but we'll see how it plays out. I don't think that gives A&M the impetus to leave. I do think you look like chickens if you leave.
I think the SEC is more likely to have schools taking us against them mindset. I'm not saying Alabama and Auburn are going to be buddies now. But when the Longhorn Network's happening, the Big 12 schools had a mindset of, man, we really need Texas. We can't afford to lose them to the Pac-12, Pac-10 to the 12 at the time. But the SEC has enough schools that believe in themselves, Tennessee, Florida, LSU, Bama, Auburn, that I think they could say, no, you're not going to just push us around. Texas will try, but I don't think it'll be as easy against the SEC powers as it was the Big 12 teams that already saw themselves below Texas.
Yeah, and in that league, you had Texas and Oklahoma even got a bigger share of the cash, because they were so important. Good point. All right, when we come back, there aren't just rumors about A&M leaving. There are rumors about Clemson and Florida State leaving the ACC soon and possibly landing in the SEC. Let's discuss that next. Come on back. Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Madisonville Marine. Creval center console boats, Hurricane deck boats, Godfrey Aqua Patio pontoon boats, G3 John boats, Skeeter bass boats. That's only some of the types of boats they carry at Madisonville Marine. If you want one boat, your kids want another boat, and your wife wants another boat, or if you want one and your husband wants another boat, if you're a woman watching, get down to Madisonville Marine. They'll help sort it all out for you. Their goal is to sell you the right boat for you and your family, not just a boat. Because if you're happy, you're going to get more boats, and your kids will grow up and they'll get boats there. That's how Madisonville Marine's been doing it since the mid-'70s. madmarine.com. Get down there and check them out. There's no better place to buy a boat. All right, we're going to be kind of quick on this one. It's been vague. YouTube, this is even more vague than the Texas A&M stuff. I watched one of these clips the other day that everyone else is linking to, and it was just double talk, and there was no there. But the not there is Florida State and Clemson are going to be announced soon that they are getting out of the ACC. Never mind the how. They're both suing to try and get out. Never mind how. But they're going to get out soon, as in July, as in maybe today. Do we think Clemson and Florida State, clearly they want out. Clearly they'll get out at some point. But do we think that's going to be soon? And then also, if they get out, do we think it's a natural that they come to the SEC?
We'll see it at the Ace.
Put me down for a maybe on this one.
Well, there's no there in that chair either. Okay.
So the Texas-Oklahoma thing, it happened with the Houston Chronicle report at SEC Media Days. Well, what's happening this week? SEC Media Days. So I'll buy it in some way that if there is a lead up, the timing would be right for the league. So kind of the follow-up question you have, do you buy that it could happen? And if it's happening with Clemson and Florida State out of the ACC, is it to the SEC? The timing would line up with the SEC to have news leak while they have their big media event going on. Funny thing is, last time there's a whole lot of no commenting going on, but it leaked at the time of SEC Media Days for a reason. So it would be appropriate, if it's going to happen, for it to happen in the next few days.
The interesting thing, that was a bit of a bombshell, though. There weren't a whole lot of, there was none of this chatter stuff.
Right.
Yeah. If Florida State and Clemson were suing the NCAA, they'd be out of that deal, right?
Yeah.
Because the NCAA doesn't win any of those things.
That's right.
I do think that they're going to end up getting out of the deal, and I think it'll be within the next 3 years. I actually do think a natural landing spot would be the SEC. Why not?
No, I think it'd be the best landing spot. I think the SEC would be smart to get them because it's now all about getting brand names to create TV matchups. It's not about, well, you need to get it. We're already in that state. That was the last round of expansion. That's not what this one's about.
And you got some natural rivalries anyway.
Although supposedly those natural rivals want to keep their rivals out of here, which
that's what makes them rivals.
Yeah, and if I'm Texas A&M and Florida and South Carolina try and keep out Florida State and Clemson, I would find that very ironic. That you hosed us with Texas, but you want to keep your rival out. Do you think that this could be happening sooner than anyone anticipates, and that it would wind up in the SEC?
That's the tricky part. To me, we know Florida State wants out. We know the SEC is probably where they would prefer to go. Clemson, I think they'd prefer to be in the SEC. So I'm buying the Florida State and Clemson to SEC talk. The timing I'm less certain about because it is a sticky situation. I'm not sure they can get out right now. But could they somehow put out their intent to do it and they'll figure out the logistics later? Maybe, that's plausible, but it still seems like they've got a lot more to work out, so I'm not sure it happens that soon, but maybe they find a way.
If they don't win their court cases and the ACC doesn't cut a deal, they would be giving up their media rights through 2036.
Yeah.
Whereas Texas and Oklahoma sat out 3 years between the announcement. Now, 3 years versus 12 years, that's a big difference.
So what is today, Sunday the 14th? There's no news that's been coming out yet. So the way I look at it, you brought up the 36. Maybe one day down the line, I could see Clemson, I could see Florida State getting into the SEC. But every year, kind of like a high-powered baseball contract, you shred that year, you're a year closer to it happening. Do I believe they make it all the way to 36? No chance. I think it's any time this decade, not buying that either. Plus, we're not even asking the question I think is important. Does the SEC even want Florida State and Clemson? I know they want to get out, but do they want to? Does that the conference would expand to 18?
You'd need what, 12? You need 3/4 to say yes. So you'd need 12 of the 16.
I wonder at what point, to our discussion earlier, at what point do SEC teams start to push back on this a little bit and say, maybe we don't need to go down this road? I don't know if there's a point. I mean, it's so much money out there supposedly for all of them, but at a certain point, this becomes really bad for some of these programs we talked about.
Right.
Would you take them to keep them from going to the Big Ten?
See, I don't think the Big Ten would go after them because they just don't go after non-AAU schools. I mean, they got 18 teams in that league right now. All of them are AAU except Nebraska, and Nebraska was AAU when they went in. And you've got all those presidents up there who love lording that over everybody. So I know that people out there like academics don't matter. Again, though, 18 of 18 schools. I think the only school that gets in there without AAU is Notre Dame. But could be wrong. Again, what do you cross off the list in this world? But this is go ahead very quickly.
Jimmy's got a great point. They've never come out and geography's out the door. I don't know if Greg Sankey would ever allow the Big Ten to come south of Kentucky and plant their flag and go, hello, Carolina, hello, Florida State, maybe Miami.
Perfect. Let's have some fun. When we come back, what if the Big Ten went nuts? What if they went scorched earth? What if we go back to the Cold War and they decided nuclear first strike? We can own all of college football. If we make these moves, the SEC is a second-class league. What if they did it? What would it look like? Should they do that? Should they be thinking mean and ruthless? I would be. Come on back. Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Daniel Hood Roofing. Daniel and his inspectors won't tell you there's a problem with your roof if they don't find a problem with your roof. And if they do find a problem with the roof, they're going to show you the problem on video. And they have equipment to show you exactly how much water is getting past your shingles. Call today for a free roof inspection. Don't cost nothing, as they say, and it could save you a lot. DanielHoodRoofing.com. All right, what if the Big Ten went NFL? And by that, look at this crazy thing. They are already a national league, okay? They're already coast to coast. We know that. Unlike the SEC, they're on 3 networks. They're like the NFL has done it, the NBA is doing it, the Big Ten has done it. They're on CBS, Fox, and NBC. What if they just went out and said, you know, there are a whole lot of AAU schools out there. Let's say the ACC collapses, all right? Georgia Tech, Miami, Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Pitt, those are all AAU schools. Big 12 has 5 more AAU schools. Let's say the Big 10 just says, we're going after everybody. That's Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas. Then they add 2 more AAU schools to fill out a southern wing where Sankey wouldn't want them coming.
There you go.
They add Tulane and USF. Vince Ferrara's alma mater is an AAU school. Didn't know that. And then you throw in Notre Dame, the one non-AAU school. So you could do that league right there. You look like the NFL. You cover coast to coast. You've got some of the best names in all of sports. And the trick is, if you're still in some sort of playoff structure with the SEC, you've got 32 votes, whereas the SEC does not, which means if you want to create a 4 buys for all Big Ten teams at the start of your playoff, well, you got the votes to do it. Not to mention, if you played a 10-game conference schedule among 32 teams, which wouldn't be crazy, that's 160 games of inventory. To put that in perspective, this year the SEC will have 64. They'd have 100 more games to sell to the networks. More money, more power, and they probably cut off the SEC as just a regional league tied to one network. Now, that is a doomsday scenario. That is the nuclear first strike option. I don't think that would ever happen. But if you're the Big Ten, would you be looking at it and considering it if you could own the world?
You might be the person to ask this question, so I want to know right now. You just put Notre Dame on this list in this doomsday scenario. Would it be 4 networks? Because do you acquire NBC and Notre Dame by doing this as well?
Well, they've already got NBC as part of their league.
I
but
guess,
yeah, I guess
depending on how they would divide that up into
Yeah.
like the secondary, the streamings, and all the other things that NBC's tied in together.
Well, you'd have to work through all these. I mean,
Right,
here's the
that's
deal.
why I
it would
questioned
never
some of
come
that.
together so smoothly. But I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking,
I don't know if Greg Sankey would ever allow that to get to that scenario, but to answer your question, if that did come to fruition, it would be crippling. And the SEC would be, I think you would hear that heart monitor distant.
God, I just hope I retire before that.
yeah. If that happened, do you think the Big Ten should even look at that? Should they be looking big? Forget that. Should they be looking at, we're closer to being a national league than the SEC. Let's get there before they can.
Why
What was
not?
the Nathan Bedford for it? Get there firstest with the mostest?
Why
Should
not?
they be doing that?
Yeah.
Okay, why not?
Which is probably why Greg Sankey called the commissioner of the Big Ten to have discussion to try to
Fend
have a
off.
mea culpa, yeah. Well, I don't know about fend off, but to at least, hey, let's get along, guys.
It certainly worked with the Pac-12 and their alliance with the Big Ten. But that was a previous commissioner. Josh, your thoughts?
Well, we need to talk to Jimmy about the definition of retirement, but that'll be afterward. I'm entertained by the idea, by the way. I'll buy the Heartland merch. I would be in on that. The SEC would still have so much talent in terms of players going to the big schools, the schools we're talking about right now in the conference. I can't imagine the SEC would say, they're going to be there and we'll just stay where we are. I would think that would come back to the Clemson Florida State conversation if they
We'll get to
see
that, yeah.
if they see the Big Ten making these moves, the SEC has to make its moves as well. So which team is thinking let's get ahead of the other is a big part of this.
Anybody thinking that, well, no team would choose the Big Ten over the ACC, remember right now, as it stands, The Big Ten makes Big Ten schools make about $10 million more, as far as we know, than SEC schools, which may not seem big to you, but over the course of a decade, that's $100 million more to Minnesota than to Tennessee, as far as what the numbers we've seen.
And, maybe it wouldn't be crippling as I started the segment, but all those more games that you could sell inventory, what keeps some of those SEC schools from going, I don't know if I like your attitude, SEC, and then they go where the grass is greener?
Yeah, would a Kentucky, for example, say, I've got a better chance of winning in a division with Minnesota and Kansas State than I do in a league with this bunch? Possible.
I'm intrigued by the possibilities. I'll give you kudos on your division names. I like them way better than legends and leaders already. But
Steel Belt, I was particularly proud of. Yes.
I think there's some potential there. I don't know. I still look at it and see like 7, 8 legitimately good football programs. So I don't know how much it helps you in terms of like winning championships, dominating the playoff. It gives you a lot more inventory to sell, a lot more money. That's going to help. But if it's an arms race to collect contenders, would you not be better off just going and getting Miami and Notre Dame or something like that? I mean, just getting the good ones out of the schools you mentioned, and leaving the other ones off to the side.
Okay, well, let's say that. Let's say they wanted to go to 24.
Yeah.
Instead of 32. Let's say you add, what are they at, 18? You add 6 more schools. If you're the Big Ten commissioner, are you sitting there saying, no, we're good, or are you plotting?
I'm plotting. I want this thing, selfishly, I want this thing to get to a standoff eventually. Whatever that takes to get them in a Cold War stance that say, if you make the next move, we're doing this.
Yeah.
But until then, we're good. I want it to get to that point. I hope they're there now, but I don't think they are.
We are blockading Cuba. Do not go across this line.
Yeah.
Tony Petitti, Big Ten commissioner, needs to be playing chess, not checkers, always thinking.
I agree. Yeah. I would have the plan. You always hear ADs that say, well, I've got a list of coaches in case something happens. If it were me, I would be looking at this saying, all right, look, what the SEC surprised us with Oklahoma, Texas. Could they surprise us with something else? Or do we want to be the ones who make the surprise? Anyway, let's say that happened. Let's say that crazy plan happened. What would the SEC do? You're saying they'd be great. They'd be fine. Would they? Let's take a look. Come on back. Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Safety Systems. Home automation, security systems, fire and life safety systems, they do it all, and they do it all well at Safety Systems. If you're building a new office, new restaurant, new condo, new daycare, you've got to install and check every year your fire systems, your life safety systems. Well, Safety Systems not only installs it, not only monitors it, but they also can do those yearly checks. They do it all. Safety Systems. Call VFL J.J. Surlis and his team this week. All right, if the Big Ten did something akin to what we just showed you in that last segment, they would have the SEC boxed in, and here would be the best options for an SEC counterpunch. This is kind of like one of those deals, if the Ruskies hit you first, all you got left is like a town in Kansas. That was like my 1980s Red Dawn moment. All right, so anyway, Baylor, Clemson, Florida State, okay, Houston, we mentioned them earlier, Louisville, Memphis, I'm sure that would be a big happy moment for Tennessee. Oklahoma State, SMU, TCU, so you're just going further west. Texas Tech, UCF, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, West Virginia. It's not a great list, is it?
No.
Okay, so let's assume they just take Clemson, Florida State. They want to get into Virginia, so they take Virginia Tech and West Virginia. Let's put this next graphic up. All right, so basically everybody on the left stays the same. You move South Carolina over, and you've added an Atlantic division with Clemson, Florida State, NC State, Virginia Tech. I think from a fan standpoint, that's great.
I was going to say, I like that.
I'd be fine with that from a fan standpoint. The problem is cash and power. That is not good for business. You are literally just a regional league, and you're on one network where the other guys have sold it. So if you're Greg Sankey and the SEC, does this make Florida State and Clemson more of a target for you right now? I think all eyes are on North Carolina, Big Ten and SEC. Are you, if you're Greg Sankey, plotting at the moment to try and somehow, please win that lawsuit, Florida State? Please.
I would think so, because as you mentioned, there are not a lot of really good options out there, and there are not many teams on that list that move the needle. So yes, I would be looking at that. I'd also see if there's some other network out there that I could align myself with.
Mm-hmm. Could you, is that one where it's Netflix becomes they just got in bed with the NFL. Do they become the SEC streamer? Certainly possible.
You brought up the streaming. I'd call Netflix, Apple TV, Hulu,
Prime,
whatever I can do, and just say, What can we do, boys?
I think they should do that. Go to 9 games now. Get those extra 8 games. ESPN doesn't want to pay for them. Have ESPN bid them out to Hulu or wherever. It's a good win for everybody.
Done. Outside of Clemson and Florida State, the list that you put up, there's not a lot out there. And now, if you were to be able to
Wake Forest?
maybe if you were able to lure, say, this won't be popular, but if you got North Carolina and say Miami. Now, I understand Miami's already on another list with the Big Ten, but I'm trying to think, what could you do to branch off where it's this is ours, that is yours, and keep from that flag planting moment? That would be it. That would be it.
I keep thinking 20 is the number that both conferences
Yes.
have in mind. I hope I'm right about
Yeah,
that.
I do too.
I'm afraid that I'm not. I'm afraid it could be more like 24, but I keep hoping 20 is the right number. And if it is, I've thought about, Clemson, Florida State, 2 for the SEC. Who are the other 2?
It's North Carolina. Everybody says North Carolina is more valuable than anybody outside Notre Dame.
And I think that's true. And then do you bring Duke with them or anything like that?
Or NC State.
Or NC State.
Yeah.
I love the North Carolina. I don't know how much I love North Carolina and Duke maybe being handcuffed
Right.
together like Texas and Oklahoma just were together.
There
Be
was-
great for basketball.
Yeah.
But as you told me last week, football's king.
Well, and they talked about the fact that we mentioned this on the show a few weeks ago. Cal and UCLA. UCLA left Cal behind. They're part of the same school board out there, so now they're having to pay calimony. UCLA is having to give $10 million a year back to Cal, which they weren't counting on when they left. And after that, there was a move in the state of North Carolina in the legislature over there. I don't know where it went, trying to tie North Carolina and NC State together. So, if you wound up with Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, NC State, I think there's value there. I think it's, those are the best of that. There's talk they want to get into Virginia. I would rather have Virginia Tech than Virginia, but Virginia is the school that people want. Do you think the SEC should be plotting, Josh?
Yes, I think from the fan standpoint, if you're bringing in some of those ACC schools, the 4 you just mentioned, it'd be easy to just rip on them like you already do as ACC members, just as Atlantic Division members maybe in the league. I think a big deal if they're planning, okay, what schools, how many, is it 4? Are we going 16 to 20? Yeah. The big conversation with that has to be what TV is coming with that. And so the previous segment was about the Big Ten going the NFL route. That needs to be the SEC's mindset from a television standpoint. The NFL has said, okay, we're going to throw a few games on Peacock. We're doing the Netflix thing now.
Yeah.
And
Prime already.
Prime has already happened on Thursday night games, and fans complain, but fans figure out ways to get on there so they can see. And if you have a product that is going there, you'll have enough fans that I think that would go there, and it'd be a new way to find money that they're, I think, still searching for compared to what the Big Ten has done recently with their different TV options.
I drew this as though the SEC is at a bit of a disadvantage. I think they are. Not from a talent perspective, not from better team perspective, not from fan perspective. I still think, I don't like Texas and Oklahoma being in, but you're still regional, whereas the Big Ten is nonsensical in what it is. However, because it's nonsensical, I feel like they're better positioned with their 3 networks to go out. If this thing is to get huge, I think they've got a leg up on you on the hugeness. I think they get an easier path to huge. Does anybody else feel that way, or do you think that SEC's better than the Big Ten right now?
No, I agree with you, but here's the other part of it too. If you're the ESPN, ABC, and you got the SEC, why are you going to throw a whole lot more money at them? What's their bargaining chip to go somewhere else?
Right.
So they may not pay you a whole lot more money if you expand to 20.
Which is why you'd need to, and the problem is you've given all your rights to ESPN, so if you want to go do anything with a streamer, ESPN has to say okay to it.
Yeah, and they're making the move with Turner with the playoff, right? So maybe you can talk ESPN to, hey, you need a little help here too. Why don't we help each other?
Which, for the old timers out there, and you, Turner, WTBS, used to be the weekly home of an SEC game. They used to have that before it became JP and Lincoln Financial. WTBS used to have a weekly SEC game. So
I was like, all this discussion is why I'm glad, even if it's maybe I'm naive in thinking that they're actually thinking of the best for all parties on some level. I don't think they really are, but on some level maybe they are. But the SEC Big Ten kind of coalition is the first time we've actually had somebody worry about the big picture. Everything else has been totally selfish. I'm hopeful that at least they're thinking about what this is going to do to the whole product of college sports.
another good tease, Ryan, because if they are, that means you're probably looking at the 2 of them creating some sort of super league together. Everybody talks about a super league. What would a super league look like, and could it actually happen? everybody seems to think it would be just snap of the fingers, we're going to go to this. Well, let's take a look at this and see if it could happen. Come on back. All right, welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Games and Things. If you're looking to create a home theater room for your family, start at Games and Things with their home theater seats. If you're looking to create a game room for your family, start at Games and Things. They have a massive allotment of table games, big games, small games. They got it all. Games and Things, because life should be fun, and boy, they make it fun. OurGameRoom.com to learn more. Get out and check out their showroom. It is fantastic. Carve out a couple hours because you're not going to want to leave once you're in there. All right. People are always talking about a super league made up of all the best teams. You know, people say, it'll be 64, it'll be 48. Okay, so to have fun, just to put this in perspective, I created a little 60-team deal. What I did was I took the 68 power teams you have now. I wanted to get it to 60, so I whacked out 8 teams. I just went with the biggest 60 in terms of average attendance over the last 5 years. Okay. And then I put them all 12 divisions of 5 teams each. And somebody's going to get screwed over in this because to try and make it match where you can keep all these rivalries alive, it's tough because there's more teams in the East and the West, there's more in the Southeast. So in the center, you kind of get messed up. So once again, just to show Tennessee fans that sometimes you can be the one that's screwed, I screwed Tennessee in this scenario, just to give it an idea of what it would look like. Although I don't think it's that bad. It's interesting.
History says that's going to happen anyway.
That's right. Let's take a look at this. All right. So you got a Mountain Division, Midwest, Central, Northeast. This is everywhere. And you see in the Central Division, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio State, Purdue, and Tennessee. Because if you're going to try and keep all these rivalries alive, somebody's going to get moved around. And unfortunately, it's kind of the center of the country where everything gets moved around, and you're dead center. It's easier to move everybody else around. But the point is it could be mixed up a million different ways. This way, though, allows you to keep and relaunch a million different rivalries. I mean, all the great rivalries are here. You're throwing out Vandy, you're throwing out Kansas, you're throwing out Northwestern and Wake Forest. Okay, so it's not huge names that are going. The other thing, if you played your 4 permanent rivals here and then 3 other from other divisions, let's say Tennessee had Alabama and Florida in there. So you'd be adding Ohio State every year. You could keep Alabama and Florida. Give them Georgia Tech, an old traditional rival, if you're scared of playing Georgia too. But you could keep all your traditional rivals, and it allows you to keep tons of them. The point is, this looks nice and neat. And you pick your 60 or whatever, make it a 40-team league with 10, and there's 4 divisions, whatever. The question I have, though, everybody points to this and says it's coming. I don't think it is. Because do you know how many contracts are going to have to be broken to get to that? In terms of TV deals, buyouts from leagues just falling apart, new system, if that's a new system other than the NCAA. I just don't see it all happening like that. Am I wrong? It just seems like this is going to be a lot of evolution as opposed to, oh yeah, it's going to be a super league and it's going to do this.
Yeah, I don't see that. To me, the only way a super league happens is if it's, say, a cooperative between the Big Ten and the SEC, and they just bring their own 4 divisions and put it all together, and they negotiate their own TV deal and split it down the middle or something. That's the only way I could even see it. So I'm with you. That seems like a few evolutions away from where we are now.
Yeah,
I think it would take a lot.
Yeah, whether it's 60 or 40, everybody just seems to think it's going to be a simple deal. There's a lot of paperwork involved in that. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits when it happens.
Yeah, your TV contracts in some instances run out
2036 versus 2030.
Yeah. For a long time.
Yeah.
You throwing out Vanderbilt, by the way, makes me wonder if we can work relegation into the next format of whatever this is.
I'm for whatever relegates Vanderbilt.
That would be tremendous.
So a college football Premier League, and then you have your second division below that.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in 20, 30 years where these big conferences have become so huge, but the funny idea there is maybe they would break up into 5 big divisions, call them like the ACC and the SEC, something like that, and we just go back to the early 90s. But that what you just showed us, it makes sense from a spreadsheet standpoint. It doesn't make sense with the humans that are involved with it right now, who would all have to come to an agreement and break up everything that you just talked about.
I remember as a kid, I used to get Sports Illustrated, Inside Sport, and Sport Magazine. Now people are saying, what is a magazine? But got all 3 of those, and one of those, either Sport or Inside Sport, I remember late 80s, it broke down what a super league is going to look like. And it had like 48 teams or 60 teams, and it looked just like that. And they've been talking about it for 40 years, and it's still not here. It's evolving to it, but it's not going to be we're all going to be a super league and they'll do this. Have you thought about what it's going to take to get to that Super League? Tyler, we all talk about it. Everybody talks about
Yeah.
it. Check YouTube. It's everywhere. I just don't think it's as simple as people think.
No, I think what you just showed less than 45 seconds ago is a last-ditch effort. We have exhausted all options. This is where college football is going, and now here are the fit of the fit. The survival, it's now here, and let's break it up. And anybody else who doesn't make this list, well, sorry, we hate it for you. Back to Ryan's point, so that would mean that the Big Ten, per se, or the SEC, the new name conferences, all got together and agreed on something, and they weren't being selfish.
Right.
Again, last-ditch effort.
Yeah. Okay.
And no one's going to sacrifice their power and money. If the SEC has a money leg up on the Big Ten, they're not going to say, let's throw all together and share.
Why would the Big Ten, which has the
Yeah.
advantage right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. When we come back, will the powers that be, will the leagues, be happy with their cash? Or are they all going to wake up in a few years with a really big hangover and a lot of regrets? We'll discuss that next. Come on back. Welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Paper Begone. I am all about security, folks. Home defense, burglar deterrence, LifeLock for my identity, and Paper Begone. If you run a business with tons of documents, turn to the pros to dispose of that stuff that you no longer need. Paper Begone gets rid of your records or even computer hard drives. They get rid of it all in an environmentally friendly way. It's the same great company, locally owned, family owned, that bring you Junk Begone, which I'm also a huge fan and user of. Paper Begone, get in touch with them this week, paperbegone.com. All right, got kind of a short segment here to end this thing. The conferences keep growing in the chase for the almighty dollar. And they're making it hand over fist, and it's going to keep right on. Revenue is the only thing that matters. Don't let anybody tell you that, well, we're doing this for the kids. If they can help the kids, that's a nice side bonus, but right now, bonus is what they're after. They want their money. They're getting it. Do you think in 10, 15 years, all these leagues and all these power brokers are just going to be enjoying their cash and just happy? Or do you think at some point they're going to look back and have regrets and say, the old way was better. The old way made more sense. Do you think the money will wash out the love of the past?
I haven't met a lot of millionaires that look back and said, gosh, I regret making this money. So,
I'd like to find out someday.
well, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there will be few with regrets. Yeah, some will, but I think the overwhelming majority of them would say, no, we made the money. That was the decision we made, and so this is why we did it, and I don't think they would second guess it.
Who would regret it? The next commissioner of each league? I mean, it's going to be someone else cleaning up the mess later that's not involved in the decisions right now, probably, if there are any regrets. I doubt there will be anyone regretting those decisions, but if there
Not
was anyone.
publicly anyway.
Yeah.
I think you may have some regrets privately.
So it might be the commissioner after Greg Sankey or whoever, but I don't think the current regime. I think they'll be fine and they'll be happy to count their money.
Greg Sankey's job was to get more money for all the schools a part of the SEC. Publicly, no. Privately, time will tell, because let's see how this whole Texas thing goes. If, in fact, earlier in the program, if they come in and Texas starts saying, bend at the knee, kiss the ring, we're Texas, we get to play by our own rules, maybe some people will go, take your money, we don't want this, but you're already in bed.
I also think that it's possible, Josh, that if somebody like Tennessee, if your program now has too many teams above it, and you're now a second-class citizen for years to come, I think they're going to have regrets over there on the Hill. Or at Kentucky, we talked about in that first segment, teams getting pushed down. I think that they're not going to admit it, but I think they'll probably have some regrets.
Yeah, my thought would be it would be people that went along with the decisions that were being made. That
Instead of drivers, it's the people who just sidecar.
Because the drivers are probably benefiting so much that why would they regret? But those who will be hurt long term, to go back to the first segment, schools that, like in Arkansas, if they're nowhere near competition, even as difficult as it's already been, if they're nowhere near competition in the SEC, in 15 years, Arkansas is going to say, why did we say yes to letting that happen?
I think if you had Arkansas people, some of them would tell you that now about coming into the SEC because they were a better football program before they got into the
Compounded regret is
Yeah,
what they're going to deal with.
They're thinking compound interest, but it's compounded regret. Josh, Jimmy, Tyler, Ryan, thanks to all of you. Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to you for watching every single week. We'll see you right back here next week, live for the Sports Source, to cover what all goes on at SEC Media Days. See you then.